Hello Earthlings, Neutron Sound back again for part 2 of a very special double prog album review week. Yesterday we examined the new Marillion album Fear. Today we're examining the new Opeth album Sorceress. For those of you who don't know, Opeth is a Swedish death metal turned prog rock band. Their last metal album was released last decade. It was their second album with a keyboardist, which probably had something to do with them going prog, but they really sort of shifted into prog from metal. I mean, there were always prog elements in their music. They just grew so big that lead singer guitarist Michael Akerfeldt grew tired of growling, and the band just went full on prog. Whether that has anything to do with his bromance with Steven Wilson, probably. It obviously has something to do with it. Anyway, let's get to the music. Persephone is the intro of this album. It's an acoustic guitar piece. I believe both Michael Akerfeldt and Fredrik Akesson both play on this song. There's some spoken word at the end along with some harp and mellotron that follows it. And then Sorceress, the title track, begins without any guitar. It's just an organ bass riff played by Joachim Svalberg and Martin Mendez, which alternates with some riffing for both of them. But then this chugging guitar riff comes over. I guess you could call it gent. I mean, it's a really low chugging guitar riff. What else do you call it? It's the main riff of the song, which reminds me a bit of Ghost, but I'm not as familiar with Ghost as with Opeth. So this is probably the most metal song on the album. There's a bit of an eerie guitar breakdown in the middle, and then the odd meters come in, as any self-respecting prog band would do, on the bridge, where the organ is prominent again, but there's still the guitars. And then that metal section comes back with the chug. And then there's a faint line which starts in just the distorted electric piano, but then the guitar joins in, and then the organ and the bass, and it builds to this big unison line thing, which ends the piece. Track 3 is a thing Michael likes to do a lot, where he'll just name a song after a prog band or a famous song like you do with For Absent Friends. But a lot of the time he just name checks prog bands like Goblin, or in this case the Wilde Flowers, named after a very short-lived band that nonetheless spawned both Soft Machine and Caravan. Unlike Sorceress, this one starts right off with the guitar and the vocals. There's a nice wah solo by Fredrik in the middle, and then it goes into a quiet, slightly spooky guitar and electric piano section, and then Michael sings a bit over it, and then there's an acoustic 12-string riff which leads into this really metal coda. I like how at the end you suddenly hear this ringing piano chord when all the instruments drop out and you had no idea there was a piano there. And then track 4, Will o' the Wisp, is an acoustic 6/8 song with some mellotron using the flute voice. There's a nice clean solo from Fredrik in the middle, and then there's a solo from Michael at the end, which is based on a repeated scalar figure. Da 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 da. Track 5, Chrysalis, is a really driving shuffle. It's got a pretty fierce drum intro from Martin Akesson. Yeah, it's a pretty intense song with two-part vocal harmonies, which I'm assuming are Michael and Joachim. Basically, anytime there are vocals, they're singing the entire thing in harmony. It's got some nice riffs, incorporating a lot of quarter note triplets. There's a weird section in the middle where Michael and Martin are playing one unison riff, and meanwhile over it, Fredrik and Joachim are having a duel. A guitar-organ duel. And then there's, like what happened on the Wilde Flowers, there's a quiet halftime coda. Again, the vocal harmonies return, and that's basically Chrysalis. And then Sorceress 2, the other title track, is the polar opposite of its counterpart. It's stripped down to basically just acoustic guitar and mellotron, and the form is verse-chorus, verse-chorus. etc., unlike the more complicated proggy form of Sorceress. It's got some prog tropes on it, like vocal harmonies being fed through a Leslie speaker, and it's a nice contrast to Sorceress. And now we come to another classic prog name check, the Seventh Sojourn, named after the Moody Blues' 8th album, or 7th album with Justin Hayward and John Lodge. This is a strongly Middle Eastern flavored instrumental with the percussion and with the Phrygian scale and the strings playing in octaves. And it's got a nice melody, and again you get a soft acoustic folk outro with some vocal harmonies. Track 8, Strange Brew, is the longest song on the album and the only one not written by Michael alone. It was co-written by both guitarists, Michael and Frederick. It's got a slightly spooky opening section with some guitar and some vibes and some piano under Michael's voice. And then there's a sort of folky 6/8 electric melody, followed by a surprising crazy organ solo from Joachim that leads into a section that has a guitar riff at one point that kind of sounds like YYZ, but in 4/4. And then it returns to the spooky intro, but develops it into a proper section with a climax and dynamic swells and everything. And it's a great song. A Fleeting Glance is really Baroque sounding. The 12-string intro is basically something you could write a minuet on. I mean, it's got that lilt to the minuet, or that lift, or that Viennese, or maybe just Baroque thing, or maybe even Renaissance. And this Baroque feeling is not quite so explicit as we go into the verse of the song, but you can't get much more explicit than the intro. There is a short metal riff at one point, but it goes back to the Baroque intro and builds quite naturally to a climax. The keyboards on the intro of Era were probably sequenced by Michael. They were definitely not played by Joachim. They may have been sequenced by him, but I think they were just sequenced by Michael. And then after them you have this jittery dotted eighth metal riff, this dun 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 dun. It's quite syncopated, and it really launches us into the driving, epic, soaring, triumphant. I could go on using similar words to describe it, but I won't. But it's got that real quality to it, and that's mostly thanks to Axe's drumming, which is relentless and just really adds to the excitement. He really goes for it, and it's a fitting closer for this album, or any album. Michael Akerfeldt has definitely succeeded in making each track on this album clearly stand out on its own. Apart from Persephone's Slight Return, which is just the sequence keyboards from the intro of Era, and then there's the woman from Persephone delivering a similar poem on top of it. So overall, I really like this album. I could rank it among their albums a lot better if I actually listened to any of their metal albums, which I, as of yet, have not. But I have heard all their prog albums, and I have to say this is probably their best prog album so far. In terms of variety, it's the polar opposite of Damnation, although Damnation was probably so one-dimensional because it was a deliberate, complete 180 from Deliverance, which was, I believe, a deliberately heavy album. But again, Sorceress is definitely Opeth's best prog album. I can't say whether or not it's my favorite album by them, because I haven't listened to any of their metal albums all the way through. But until next time album review time rears its head, or two of them or more, this is Neutron Sound signing off. Go forth and be awesome.